I was cleaning my rifle when Jessica's scream shattered the silence of our Saturday morning. The kind of scream that cuts through your soul and tells you everything you love is about to change forever. I dropped everything and ran to the kitchen, where my wife stood frozen, phone pressed against her ear, tears already streaming down her face. "Mom's dead," she whispered, and those two words hit me harder than any enemy fire I'd ever faced. Stories of betrayal await. Subscribe now. Like, share, and stay tuned for more twists. Tell me which country you're joining from today. Share and comment. My name is Ethan Parker, and I've seen death in 13 countries across 2 deployments. I thought I understood loss. I was wrong. Jessica collapsed against the kitchen counter, her phone clattering to the floor. I caught her before she hit the ground, holding her tight as sobs racked her body. The voice on the other end was still talking, something about an accident, something about coming to identify the body. "Tell me what happened," I said, taking the phone. My voice carried that calm authority that came from years of command, but inside, my heart was racing. "This is Officer Martinez with Riverside PD. Mrs. Margaret Walsh was found dead in her home early this morning. We believe she fell down the basement stairs. I'm sorry for your loss." I looked at Jessica, who was shaking her head frantically. "That's not possible," she whispered. "Mom never goes in the basement. She's terrified of those stairs. Has been since her hip surgery." Something cold settled in my stomach. In the military, we're taught to trust our instincts, and every instinct I had was screaming that something was wrong. "Officer Martinez, this is Sergeant Ethan Parker, Jessica's husband. Can you tell me more about how she was found? A neighbor called when she didn't show up for their morning walk. Door was unlocked, and we found Mrs. Walsh at the bottom of the basement stairs. Looks like she lost her footing." Jessica grabbed my arm. "Ethan, she never left her door unlocked. Never. And she hasn't been able to do stairs since her surgery 6 months ago." I covered the phone. "Are you absolutely sure?" I helped her move everything she needed to the main floor. She even had a mini fridge installed so she wouldn't have to go downstairs for anything. Mom was paranoid about those stairs. I spoke back into the phone. "Officer, we'd like to see the scene. Mrs. Parker has some concerns about the circumstances." There was a pause. "Sir, I understand you're grieving, but this appears to be a straightforward accidental death. The coroner will make the final determination." The dismissive tone in his voice triggered something in me. I'd dealt with enough bureaucrats to recognize when someone was trying to close a case quickly. "We'll be there in an hour," I said and hung up. Jessica looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. "You believe me, don't you? About the basement?" "I believe you completely." I cupped her face in my hands. "And we're going to find out exactly what happened to your mother." The drive to Margaret's house was silent except for Jessica's occasional sniffles. I kept thinking about the last time we'd visited. Margaret had specifically asked me to get something from her basement because she couldn't manage the stairs anymore. She'd made a big deal about how grateful she was that I was there to help. Margaret Walsh lived in a quiet neighborhood where people still waved to each other and kept their yards pristine. Her house sat on a corner lot, surrounded by the rose garden she'd spent 20 years perfecting. Today, it felt like a crime scene. 2 police cars were still parked outside, and yellow tape fluttered from the front porch. Officer Martinez turned out to be a tired-looking man in his 50s who clearly wanted to be anywhere else. "Like I told you on the phone," he said without preamble. "Elderly woman, steep stairs, unfortunate accident. Happens more than you'd think." "Can we see where she fell?" Jessica asked. Martinez led us inside. The house felt wrong immediately. Margaret was meticulous about everything. Her house was always spotless, everything in its place. But today, there were subtle signs of disturbance. A picture frame slightly askew. A kitchen chair pulled out from the table. Small things that someone else might miss, but I'd been trained to notice details. The basement door stood open, and I could see the steep wooden stairs descending into darkness. There was a chalked outline at the bottom where Margaret had been found. "She was lying right there," Martinez said, pointing. "Probably tripped at the top and tumbled down." I knelt at the top of the stairs and examined the area carefully. Officer, do you see any blood on these top stairs? What? If she fell from up here and hit her head hard enough to die, there should be blood where she initially made contact. But I don't see any blood until the bottom. Martinez frowned. Maybe she didn't hit her head until she reached the bottom. That would require her to fall 15 feet without hitting a single stair on the way down. On wooden stairs this narrow, that's physically impossible. Jessica joined me at the top of the stairs. Ethan, look at this. She was pointing to scratches on the doorframe. These are fresh, and they're at shoulder height. I examined the marks. They looked like fingernail scratches, as if someone had been dragged or pushed through the doorway. Officer Martinez, I said, standing up. I think you need to treat this as a potential homicide scene. His face hardened. Sergeant, I appreciate your military experience, but I've been investigating deaths for 15 years. This is an accident, plain and simple. Now, I need you both to let us finish our work here. As we walked back to our car, Jessica grabbed my arm. He's not going to investigate this properly, is he? I looked back at Margaret's house, then at my wife's tear-stained face. In the military, when the system fails, good soldiers find another way to complete the mission. No, I said. He's not. But that doesn't mean we're giving up. Jessica looked at me with hope in her eyes for the first time all day. What do we do? I thought about Margaret, who used to bake cookies for every soldier who came home with me on leave, who had welcomed me into her family like I was her own son, who would never again get to see the grandchildren Jessica and I were planning to have. We find out who killed your mother, I said, and we make sure they pay for it. But as we drove away, I noticed a black sedan that had been parked across the street when we arrived was now following us. Someone was watching. Someone who didn't want us digging into Margaret's death. And that's when I knew for certain we were dealing with more than just a murder. We were dealing with someone who was still very much a threat. The black sedan disappeared 3 blocks from Margaret's house, but the damage was done. Someone knew we were asking questions, and they didn't like it. That night, I couldn't sleep. Jessica tossed and turned beside me, occasionally whispering her mother's name in her dreams. At 0400 hours, I gave up on rest and made coffee. Military habits die hard. When your mind won't shut down, you plan your next operation. I spread everything we knew across our kitchen table like a mission briefing. Margaret's death wasn't random, and whoever killed her was still out there, still watching. Jessica found me there at sunrise, surrounded by notes and printed articles about suspicious deaths. You've been up all night, she said, her voice hoarse from crying. I've been thinking about what your mom might have known that got her killed. I pulled out a chair for her. Jessica, I need you to tell me about Derek. Everything. She wrapped her robe tighter around herself. I thought I'd never have to talk about him again. I know this is hard, but something doesn't add up. Your mother was careful, paranoid even about security. Yet someone got into her house and forced her down those stairs. This wasn't a random break-in. Jessica stared into her coffee cup. Derek Walsh. My ex-husband. We divorced 3 years ago after. She touched her wrist unconsciously, and I saw the faint white line of an old scar. After he put me in the hospital, rage flared in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. What happened? He accused me of cheating. I wasn't, but Derek's mind worked differently. He saw threats everywhere, enemies in every shadow. When I tried to leave that night, he grabbed a kitchen knife and said he'd rather see me dead than with another man. I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. How did you get away? Mom called the police. She'd been listening through the door when he started screaming. Derek served 6 months for domestic assault, and I filed for divorce while he was locked up. And after he got out, Jessica's hand trembled under mine. He tried to get me back for 2 years. Flowers, letters, showing up at my work. Then suddenly, 6 months ago, it all stopped. I thought maybe he'd finally moved on. 6 months ago, the same time Margaret had her hip surgery and became afraid of her basement stairs. Jessica, did your mother ever mention Derek recently? Any contact at all? She shook her head. Mom hated him. She blamed herself for not seeing the signs earlier, for encouraging me to marry him. Jessica paused. But now that you mention it, she had been acting strange lately. More paranoid than usual. She installed new locks on all her doors and started asking me weird questions about my childhood. What kind of questions? About my little brother. About the day he drowned. A chill ran down my spine. Jessica had mentioned her brother once before, a family tragedy from when she was 12. Her younger brother Tommy had drowned in their backyard pool during a family barbecue. Tell me about that day. Jessica's eyes filled with tears. It was supposed to be a celebration. Derek and I had just gotten engaged. Mom was so happy, cooking for everyone. Tommy was 9, loved swimming more than anything. She wiped her eyes. He was playing in the pool with some of the other kids. Derek was supposed to be watching them while the adults got dinner ready. What happened? Derek came inside to get a beer. Said the kids were fine, just playing pool games. 20 minutes later, we found Tommy at the bottom of the deep end. Her voice broke. Derek said he must have hit his head on the diving board. The autopsy showed blunt force trauma to his skull, consistent with diving board impact. I felt pieces of a puzzle clicking together in my mind. Who found him? Derek did. He went back out to check on the kids and started screaming. By the time we got there, Tommy was already gone. And the other kids? They all said they'd gotten out to use the bathroom or get snacks. Nobody saw what happened. I stood up and walked to the window, processing this information. A 9-year-old boy dies under Derek's supervision. Derek marries Jessica. Derek becomes abusive. Jessica leaves Derek. Suddenly, Margaret starts asking questions about Tommy's death, and then Margaret ends up dead. Jessica, did your mother ever suggest that Tommy's drowning might not have been an accident? She looked up sharply. How did you? She started asking me if I remembered Derek acting strange that day. If I thought it was odd that all the kids left the pool at the same time. She even talked about hiring a private investigator to look into it. My blood ran cold. When did she say this? 3 weeks ago. I told her she was being crazy, that grief makes people see patterns that aren't there. Jessica's face went pale. Oh my God. You think Derek killed Tommy? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Stop digging, or you'll join the old lady. Jessica saw my expression and grabbed my arm. What is it? I showed her the message. Her face went white. He's watching us, isn't he? She whispered. I nodded, already moving toward our bedroom. Pack a bag. We're leaving. Where are we going? Somewhere safe while I figure out how to prove Derek killed your mother and your brother. As Jessica packed, I made 3 phone calls. First, to my army buddy Marcus, who ran a private security firm. Second, to a lawyer who specialized in reopening cold cases. Third, to Captain Rodriguez, my former unit commander who now worked military law enforcement. Derek thought he could intimidate us into silence. He'd picked the wrong soldier's family to threaten. But as we loaded our car and prepared to disappear, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. Sitting on Margaret's grave marker in our local cemetery, visible through our bedroom window, was a single black rose. Derek wasn't just threatening us. He was taunting us, showing us he could reach us anywhere. The man who had killed a 9-year-old boy and gotten away with it for 8 years wasn't going to give up easily. The safe house Marcus arranged was a small cabin 40 minutes outside town. As we settled in, I realized Derek had made a critical mistake with that threatening text. He'd revealed himself too early, confirming our suspicions while giving us time to prepare. The next morning, I drove back to Riverside PD alone. Jessica wanted to come, but I needed her safe while I handled Detective Morrison. Some battles require a soldier's approach. Morrison looked even more tired than the day before, surrounded by case files and empty coffee cups. When I walked into his office, he barely glanced up. Sergeant Parker, let me save us both some time. Your mother-in-law's death is still classified as accidental. I sat down without being invited. Detective, I served 3 tours in Afghanistan. I know what a cover-up looks like. That got his attention. His head snapped up, eyes narrowing. Excuse me. Yesterday, You dismissed physical evidence without proper examination. Today, I'm betting you haven't run forensics on those fingernail scratches or tested the basement door for fingerprints. Morrison leaned back in his chair. You think I'm corrupt? I think you're overworked and understaffed, and someone wants this case closed fast. I pulled out printed photos I'd taken with my phone. These scratches on Margaret's doorframe aren't from moving furniture. The depth and angle indicate someone clawed at the wood while being dragged backward. He studied the photos reluctantly. Even if that's true, it doesn't prove murder. Margaret Walsh weighed 98 pounds and had arthritis in both hands. These scratches required significant force and desperation. Someone was pulling her toward those stairs against her will. Morrison's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression changed. I have to take this. He stepped outside his office, but I could hear fragments through the thin walls. Told you the case was closed? Parker's asking questions. No, I can't make him disappear. When he returned, Morrison looked like a man caught between a rock and a hard place. Sergeant, some advice. Drop this investigation. There are people in this town with long memories and short tempers. Are you telling me someone's pressuring you to bury this case? He didn't answer directly, but his silence spoke volumes. Detective Morrison, what if I could provide you with new evidence? Evidence that links Margaret's death to an 8-year-old homicide. His eyes widened slightly. What homicide? Thomas Walsh, Jessica's younger brother. Officially ruled an accidental drowning, but I think Derek murdered that boy and Margaret discovered the truth. Morrison rubbed his temples. You're talking about reopening a closed case based on speculation. I'm talking about catching a killer who's been walking free for 8 years. I leaned forward. Give me 48 hours to gather evidence. If I can't provide concrete proof of Derek's guilt, I'll back off. He stared at me for a long moment. 48 hours. But if you interfere with my crime scene or harass any witnesses, I'll have you arrested. I stood to leave, then turned back. Detective, who called you just now? His face darkened. Get out of my office. I drove straight to Margaret's neighborhood, parking 2 blocks away and approaching on foot. The police tape was gone, but I'd learned long ago that crime scenes hold secrets even after the investigators leave. Margaret's house sat empty, but I wasn't interested in the house itself. I wanted to talk to the neighbors the police had ignored. Mrs. Chun, the elderly woman who lived directly across the street, was watering her garden when I approached. She looked nervous as I introduced myself. I already told police I didn't see anything, she said quickly. Mrs. Chun, I'm not with the police. I'm Margaret's son-in-law, and I believe someone murdered her. Her watering can trembled in her hands. You shouldn't say such things. What did you see that night? She glanced around nervously, then motioned me closer to her fence. A car was parked outside Margaret's house around midnight. Dark sedan, engine running. My pulse quickened. Did you see who was driving? A man got out. Tall, angry looking. He had keys to Margaret's house. Keys. He didn't break in. He unlocked the front door like he lived there. This changed everything. Derek had access to Margaret's house. Mrs. Chun, would you recognize this man if you saw him again? She nodded slowly. But I won't talk to police. That man, he looked at my house before he went inside, like he was memorizing it. Derek had been threatening witnesses before he'd even committed the murder. I spent the next hour canvassing the neighborhood. 3 houses down, I found Tom Bradley, a night shift worker who'd been leaving for work around 1 a.m. Yeah, I remember that night, he said. Heard shouting from Margaret's house. Sounded like an argument. Could you make out any words? Something about keeping quiet and protecting the family. Then it got real loud, like furniture being moved around. About 10 minutes later, everything went silent. I drove to the county records office next. If Derek had keys to Margaret's house, there had to be a paper trail. After 2 hours of searching, I found what I was looking for. Derek Walsh was listed as Margaret's emergency contact and had power of attorney for medical decisions. The documents were dated 6 months ago, right when Margaret started acting paranoid. But why would Margaret give Derek legal authority over her life? Unless Derek had forced her to sign these documents. My phone rang as I walked back to my truck. Jessica's voice was panicked. Ethan, someone's been here. They trashed the cabin. I was 20 minutes away, but I drove it in 12. The cabin looked like a war zone. Furniture overturned, drawers emptied, windows smashed. Jessica stood in the doorway with Marcus, both of them unharmed but shaken. Did you see who did this? I asked. Marcus shook his head. We were gone for 30 minutes getting groceries. When we came back, the place was destroyed. I walked through the wreckage, my mind racing. Derek was escalating, getting desperate. But he'd made another mistake. Look at this. I called Jessica and Marcus over to the bedroom. They searched through our clothes, our papers, even our toothbrushes. But they didn't take anything. So what were they looking for? Jessica asked. Evidence. Derek thinks we found something that could incriminate him. I smiled grimly. Which means he's scared. And scared killers make stupid mistakes. Marcus pulled me aside. Ethan, this is getting dangerous. Maybe you should let the police handle it. The police won't handle it. But I know someone who will. I pulled out my phone and called Captain Rodriguez. It was time to bring in military justice. Captain Rodriguez arrived at the cabin 3 hours after my call, bringing 2 military investigators and enough surveillance equipment to run a small operation. Rodriguez had been my commanding officer in Afghanistan, and seeing him again reminded me why our unit never lost a man under his watch. Ethan, you've stepped into something bigger than a domestic dispute, he said, reviewing the evidence I'd compiled. Derek Walsh has connections we need to understand before you go after him directly. Rodriguez's team had run a background check on Derek while driving to meet us. What they found made my blood run cold. Derek Walsh, dishonorably discharged from the Army in 2018 for theft and assault on a fellow soldier, Rodriguez read from his tablet. Since then, he's been linked to 3 different criminal enterprises: loan sharking, illegal gambling, and weapons trafficking. The man you're hunting isn't just a wife beater. He's a career criminal. Jessica gripped my arm. You never told me any of this. Because you were trying to rebuild your life? I said gently. But now we know why Derek had access to Margaret's house. He wasn't just threatening her. He was using her as collateral for his debts. Rodriguez's investigator, Sergeant Mills, pulled up financial records on his laptop. Derek owes serious money to some very dangerous people. $43,000 to a gambling ring operating out of Los Angeles. These aren't the kind of people who accept payment plans. You think Derek killed Margaret for money? Jessica asked. I think Derek killed Margaret because she discovered something that could destroy him, I replied. Remember the power of attorney documents? Derek forced your mother to sign over legal authority 6 months ago. That's when his debts started piling up. Rodriguez studied crime scene photos from my phone. This was professional work. Derek may have pulled the trigger, but someone taught him how to stage a crime scene. Mills looked up from his computer. There's more. Derek's cell phone records show he's been in contact with Vincent Torino, a known associate of the Castellano crime family. 3 calls the day before Margaret died, 2 calls the day after. The Castellanos. I'd heard that name during my time in military intelligence. They controlled illegal gambling operations across Southern California, and they didn't hesitate to eliminate problems. So Derek's working for the mob now? I asked. Or they're using him as a disposable asset, Rodriguez said. Either way, you're not just dealing with a domestic abuser anymore. You're up against organized crime. Jessica stood up abruptly. This is insane. We should go to the FBI, get witness protection, disappear. Running won't bring justice for your mother, I said. And Derek will keep killing until someone stops him. Rodriguez pulled me aside. Ethan, I can't officially sanction what you're planning. But unofficially, Mills and I will provide surveillance support for the next 72 hours. After that, you're on your own. We set up surveillance on Derek's apartment complex from a van parked across the street. Derek lived in a rundown building where the parking lot was full of motorcycles and cars with tinted windows. The kind of place where nobody asked questions and everyone minded their own business. Derek emerged around noon, looking paranoid and constantly checking over his shoulder. He drove a beaten-up Ford pickup to a warehouse district on the east side of town, parking behind a building with no signs or windows. "That's Torino's operation," Mills confirmed through our radio. "Illegal casino in the back, loan shark office in the front." We watched Derek enter the building and emerge 30 minutes later looking terrified. He made 3 phone calls from his truck before driving away, and even from a distance, I could see his hands shaking. "He's desperate," I told Rodriguez. Whatever Torino told him in there, Derek's running out of time. Derek's next stop was Jessica's workplace, a small accounting firm downtown. He parked across the street and waited, just watching the building. When Jessica didn't appear, he got out and approached the front entrance. "He's making contact," Mills radioed. "Should we intervene?" "Not yet," I replied, though every instinct told me to protect my wife. "Let's see what he does." Derek spoke to the receptionist for less than 2 minutes before returning to his truck. His next move chilled me to the bone. He drove to our neighborhood and parked 2 blocks from our house, the one we'd abandoned after the threatening text. He sat there for an hour, making notes and taking pictures with his phone. Derek was building intelligence on our daily routines, mapping our vulnerabilities. This wasn't intimidation anymore. This was preparation for violence. My phone buzzed with a text message. Derek had somehow gotten my number. "Margaret found Tommy's medical records. Same records will prove what really happened that day. Stop digging or Jessica joins her family." I showed the message to Rodriguez, who immediately began tracing the number. "Ethan, this confirms your theory about the brother's death," he said. "Derek's admitting there are medical records that could expose him. But where would Margaret have hidden them?" "The police searched her house." Mills looked up from his equipment. "Not her house. Derek just drove to Riverside Community Bank, same bank where Margaret had her accounts. He's inside now." We watched Derek emerge from the bank 15 minutes later, carrying a small metal box. Margaret's safety deposit box. Derek had used his power of attorney to access it. "Whatever evidence Margaret collected, Derek now has it," Rodriguez said grimly. But Derek made a mistake. Instead of destroying the evidence immediately, he drove back to his apartment. Fear and desperation were clouding his judgment, making him act irrationally. "We have one chance," I told Rodriguez. "Derek has the evidence we need to prove he killed Tommy and Margaret. But if he destroys it, we lose everything." "What are you thinking?" "Derek's scared, broke, and running out of options. Men like that make bad decisions." I checked my weapon and body armor. "Tonight, I'm going to give him a choice: surrender the evidence or face the consequences." Rodriguez grabbed my arm. "Ethan, that's suicide. Derek's connected to professional killers. Then it's a good thing I'm a professional soldier." I spent the night planning my approach to Derek's apartment, but Rodriguez had other ideas. At dawn, he woke me with news that changed everything. "Derek's gone," he said, showing me surveillance photos. "Left his apartment at 0300 hours with 2 suitcases and the metal box from Margaret's safety deposit box. But he made a mistake." Mills pulled up traffic camera footage on his laptop. Derek stopped at a 24-hour diner on Highway 60. He spent 40 minutes inside, and our lip-reading specialist caught fragments of his conversation with someone on the phone. "What did he say?" "The old lady hid more than I thought, and give me 72 hours to find it." Derek doesn't have all of Margaret's evidence. There's something else out there. This meant Margaret had been smarter than Derek realized. She'd hidden evidence in multiple locations, and Derek was scrambling to find it before we did. Where would Margaret hide something Derek couldn't access? I asked Jessica. She thought for a moment. Mom was paranoid about banks after Dad died. She didn't trust safety deposit boxes completely. Jessica's eyes widened. But she trusted Mrs. Chun. Mrs. Chun, the elderly neighbor who'd seen Derek's car that night. Margaret and Mrs. Chun had been friends for 15 years, sharing morning walks and weekly grocery trips. If Margaret needed to hide something from someone with legal access to her house and bank accounts, she'd give it to her most trusted friend. We drove to Mrs. Chin's house immediately. The small, neat home sat directly across from Margaret's, with clear sight lines to the front door and driveway. Perfect for a witness. Mrs. Chun answered our knock wearing a floral dress and an expression of deep worry. When she saw Jessica, tears filled her eyes. "Jessica, dear, I'm so sorry about your mother. Such a good woman, taken too soon." "Mrs. Chun, we need to ask you some questions about the night Mom died," Jessica said gently. The older woman glanced nervously up and down the street before inviting us inside. Her living room was filled with family photos and smelled like jasmine tea. "I already told that police officer I didn't see anything," she said quickly. "Mrs. Chun, my name is Ethan Parker. I'm Jessica's husband, and I believe someone murdered Margaret. I think you saw who did it." She sat down heavily in her favorite chair, hands trembling. "You don't understand. That man, he came back. My blood ran cold. Derek came back here 2 nights ago. He knocked on my door at midnight, asking if Margaret had given me anything to hold. He was polite, but his eyes..." She shivered. "Those were the eyes of someone who hurts people. What did you tell him?" I said no, of course, but he knew I was lying. He stood on my porch for 5 minutes, just staring at me. Then he said, "I'll be watching, Mrs. Chun. I'll know if you talk to anyone." Jessica knelt beside Mrs. Chen's chair. "Did my mother give you something?" Mrs. Chun looked between us, fear and loyalty warring in her expression. Finally, she nodded. 3 weeks before she died, Margaret came over very upset. She said if anything happened to her, I should give this to the police. Mrs. Chin stood and walked to an old china cabinet. From behind a stack of plates, she retrieved a manila envelope. "But after what happened to Margaret, and after that man came here, I was too frightened. I didn't know who to trust." I took the envelope with steady hands, though my heart was racing. Inside were photocopied medical records, police reports, and handwritten notes in Margaret's careful script. The medical records were from the day Tommy drowned 8 years ago. I read them twice before the full implications hit me. "Jessica, look at this. Tommy's autopsy report shows blunt force trauma to his skull, but the angle and force are inconsistent with hitting a diving board." Jessica read over my shoulder. "What does that mean?" "It means someone hit Tommy in the head with an object, then threw him in the pool to make it look like a diving accident." But Margaret's handwritten notes contained a real bombshell. She'd been investigating Tommy's death for months, and she'd discovered something that would destroy Derek completely. "Mrs. Chun," I said, looking up from the papers. "Did Margaret ever mention a video recording?" The older woman nodded slowly. She said she found her husband's old camera in the attic, the one he used to record family barbecues. Margaret discovered it still had footage from the day Tommy died. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. "Where is this camera?" Margaret said she hid it somewhere Derek would never think to look, somewhere that reminded her of happier times with Tommy. Jessica gasped. "The pool house. Mom built it after Tommy died as a memorial. Derek hates going there because it reminds him of questions people asked about that day. We had to get to that pool house before Derek figured out where Margaret had hidden the video evidence." But as we prepared to leave Mrs. Chin's house, my phone buzzed with another message. "Stop looking for what doesn't belong to you. Last warning." This time, Derek had included a photo with his threat. It showed Jessica's workplace from across the street, taken just hours ago. He was watching us, tracking our movements, preparing for something. Mrs. Chun grabbed my arm as we reached the door. "Be very careful. That man is not finished killing." As we drove toward Margaret's house, I noticed the same black sedan that had followed us before. This time, it wasn't trying to hide. Derek wanted us to know he was there, wanted us to feel hunted. But he'd made a critical error. By threatening Mrs. Chun and revealing the existence of video evidence, Derek had confirmed our theory about Tommy's murder. Now we just had to reach that pool house before Derek decided to eliminate the witnesses permanently. The black sedan stayed 3 cars behind us as we drove toward Margaret's house. Derek was getting bolder, more desperate. That made him dangerous, but it also made him sloppy. He's not even trying to hide anymore, Jessica said, watching the mirrors. I pulled into Margaret's driveway and parked close to the house. The pool house sat in the backyard, a small structure Margaret had built as a memorial to Tommy. Derek's sedan drove past without slowing, but I knew he'd be back. We have maybe 10 minutes before he circles back with reinforcements, I told Jessica. Stay close to me and move fast. The pool house was locked, but I learned a few things about breaking and entering during my military service. The door gave way after 30 seconds of work with my multi-tool. Inside, the small building felt like a shrine. Photos of Tommy covered every wall. Swimming trophies, school pictures, birthday parties. Margaret had preserved her son's memory in this quiet space, and somewhere in here, she'd hidden the evidence that would destroy his killer. Jessica moved through the room methodically, checking behind picture frames and inside storage boxes. I focused on places where an elderly woman could hide something but retrieve it easily when needed. Ethan, look at this. Jessica was standing beside Tommy's swimming trophy case. Behind the largest trophy, she'd found a small digital camera wrapped in plastic. My hands shook as I powered it on. The camera was 8 years old, but the battery still held a charge. Margaret had been maintaining it, keeping it ready for this moment. The video files showed timestamps from the day Tommy died. I selected the last recording and pressed play. The footage showed the backyard pool area during the family barbecue. Kids were playing in the water, adults chatting around picnic tables. Everything looked normal until Derek appeared in frame, carrying 2 beers and wearing that fake smile I'd learned to recognize. Tommy, come here for a second. Derek's voice came through the camera's tinny speaker. 9-year-old Tommy swam to the pool's edge, trusting and happy. Derek knelt down, still smiling, and handed Tommy something I couldn't see clearly. Want to play a game? See if you can swim to the bottom and bring this back up. Tommy took the object and dove down. Derek immediately looked around to make sure no other kids were watching. Then he picked up the pool skimmer, a long aluminum pole with a net on the end. What happened next made my blood turn to ice. Derek held the skimmer like a spear and drove the handle down into the water with tremendous force. Tommy surfaced gasping, blood streaming from his head. Derek hit him again and again, holding the boy underwater with the pole. Tommy stopped moving. Derek quickly pulled the skimmer out and tossed it aside. He jumped into the pool, positioning Tommy's body near the diving board, then began screaming for help. "Oh my God," Jessica whispered. "He murdered my baby brother right there in front of everyone." I stopped the video, my hands clenched into fists. Derek had beaten a 9-year-old child to death, then staged it as an accident. For 8 years, he'd walked free while Margaret lived with the agony of knowing something was wrong, but not being able to prove it. A car door slammed outside. "He's back," I said, pocketing the camera. "We need to go." But when we reached the pool house door, I saw Derek wasn't alone. 2 men in expensive suits stood beside his sedan. Vincent Torino's people, the mob associates Rodriguez had warned me about. Derek was pointing at the pool house, his voice carrying across the yard. "They're in there. I want that evidence destroyed and both of them eliminated." We were trapped. The pool house had only one exit, and 3 killers stood between us and freedom. I pulled out my phone and speed-dialed Rodriguez, but the call went straight to voicemail. We were on our own. "Ethan, there's a window in the back," Jessica whispered. The window was small, barely large enough for us to squeeze through, but it opened onto Margaret's garden, where tall hedges might provide cover. I boosted Jessica through first, then followed as quietly as possible. We crouched behind Margaret's rose bushes, 50 yards from our car with armed criminals blocking every path of escape. Derek and his companions were approaching the pool house. In less than a minute, they'd discover we were gone and begin searching the property. The neighbor's fence, I whispered to Jessica. If we can reach Mrs. Chin's backyard, we can call for help. We crawled through Margaret's garden on our hands and knees, using flower beds and ornamental trees for concealment. Behind us, I heard Derek kick in the pool house door. They're gone, his voice echoed with rage. Find them. We reached the fence line just as footsteps pounded across Margaret's patio. I helped Jessica climb over the wooden fence, then hauled myself across just as Derek's voice came from directly behind us. There, in the neighbor's yard. Mrs. Chin's back door flew open as we stumbled across her lawn. The elderly woman took one look at our faces and ushered us inside without hesitation. Call 911, I told her. Tell them there are armed men on Margaret's property. But as Mrs. Chin reached for her phone, it rang in her hands. She answered automatically, then her face went pale. It's for you, she said, handing me the receiver. Derek's voice came through the line, cold and certain. You have something that belongs to me, soldier boy. Bring me that camera, or I start killing people you care about. Go to hell. Mrs. Chun has such a lovely granddaughter. Lives in San Diego, works at that pediatric hospital downtown. Be a shame if something happened to her, because you couldn't follow simple instructions. My blood turned to ice. Derek had done his homework, identified everyone we'd talked to, everyone who'd helped us. He wasn't just threatening us anymore. He was threatening innocent people. Derek's threat hung in the air like poison. Mrs. Chun grabbed my arm, her eyes wide with terror for her granddaughter's safety. Meet me at the Riverside Industrial Park, Warehouse 47, in 1 hour, Derek continued. Bring the camera. Come alone, or I start making calls to some very dangerous people. The line went dead. Jessica looked at me with desperate eyes. We can't give him that evidence. It's the only proof we have that he murdered Tommy. And we can't let him hurt innocent people because of our investigation. I was already calculating options, thinking like the soldier Derek didn't know I still was. But Derek made a mistake. He chose a meeting place, which means he's planning to eliminate us regardless. Mrs. Chun sat down heavily. My granddaughter Lisa is all I have left. Please don't let anything happen to her. I knelt beside her chair. Mrs. Chun, I need you to call Lisa right now. Tell her to go to the nearest police station and stay there until this is over. Don't explain everything. Just tell her you're worried about a break-in. While Mrs. Chun made the call, I studied the camera footage again. Something had been bothering me about Derek's behavior in the video, and now I realized what it was. Derek wasn't just methodical in his murder of Tommy. He was trained. The way he positioned himself, the efficiency of his movements, the calculated staging afterward. This wasn't the work of an angry civilian. This was military precision. I called Rodriguez on his emergency line. Ethan, where the hell are you? Derek's apartment building is surrounded by federal agents. Turns out his mob connections run deeper than we thought. Captain, I need you to run Derek Walsh's military service record again. Not just the official discharge papers. I want to see his complete file, including any training specializations. Why? What did you find? Derek murdered a 9-year-old boy with combat-level efficiency 8 years ago. I have it on video. But his attack patterns suggest advanced training he shouldn't have had. Rodriguez was quiet for a moment. I'll have Mills pull the full records. Where are you now? Derek's forcing a meeting. He's threatening to kill civilians if I don't surrender evidence. Ethan, do not engage him alone. The FBI is treating this as organized crime now. Let them handle it. There's no time. Derek's unraveling, and desperate criminals kill hostages. I hung up before Rodriguez could argue further. Jessica was watching me with the look I'd seen on families' faces when I had to deploy, love mixed with the terrible knowledge that I might not come home. You're going after him, she said. I'm going to end this. My phone buzzed with a text from Mills. Derek Walsh's military records show discrepancies. Cross-referencing with deceased personnel files now. Then a second text that made my world tilt. Derek Walsh assumed identity of Kia soldier Marcus Webb in 2018. Webb was your squad mate, killed in Kandahar province. Marcus Webb, my brother-in-arms who died saving 3 civilians from an IED blast. The man whose funeral I'd attended, whose family I still sent Christmas cards to. Derek had been wearing Marcus's name like a mask for 7 years. The rage that filled me was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Derek hadn't just murdered a child and an elderly woman. He desecrated the memory of a hero, used Marcus's sacrifice to build a criminal empire. Jessica saw my expression change. What is it? Derek's been living under the identity of a soldier who died in my unit. A good man who saved lives. I stood up, my decision made. This isn't just about justice for your family anymore. Derek's been dishonoring every soldier who ever served with honor. Mrs. Chin finished her call to her granddaughter. Lisa is safe at the police station. Now what do we do? Now I'm going to that warehouse, I said, but not to surrender. I spent the next 30 minutes preparing for combat. Derek expected a grieving husband desperate to protect his family. Instead, he was going to face a United States Army Ranger with 13 deployments and nothing left to lose. Rodriguez called as I was checking my equipment. Ethan, Mills found more. Derek's been using Marcus Webb's identity to launder money through military contractor accounts. He's stolen over $200,000 meant for veterans' families. The depth of Derek's betrayal was staggering. He'd murdered children, threatened innocents, and stolen from military families, all while wearing the name of a fallen hero. Captain, I'm going to need backup at Riverside Industrial Park. Federal agents are already en route to Derek's known locations. But Ethan, there's something else. Derek's not working alone. Vincent Torino's people have been monitoring police communications. They know about the federal investigation, which meant Derek knew the FBI was closing in. A cornered animal with nothing left to lose was the most dangerous kind of enemy. I kissed Jessica goodbye, holding her close for what might be the last time. Bring my mother justice, she whispered. Bring Tommy justice. But come home to me. As I drove toward the industrial park, my phone rang one final time. Derek's voice was different now, calmer, more focused. The voice of a man who'd made peace with what he was about to do. Change of plans, soldier boy. I know who you really are now. Ethan Parker, Afghanistan veteran, decorated ranger. Marcus Webb's old squad mate. My blood went cold. Derek knew about Marcus. That's right. I've been living as your dead friend for 7 years. Using his benefits, his honor, his sacrifice. And you know what? He died for nothing, just like you're going to. Derek's words hit me like shrapnel. He'd been living as Marcus Webb, my brother-in-arms who died saving civilians in Afghanistan. The rage that filled me was colder than anything I'd felt in combat. You don't deserve to speak his name, I said into the phone. Marcus Webb was weak, died for strangers who didn't even know his name. But his death made me rich. Derek's laugh was poison. I've been collecting his disability benefits, using his military contractor credentials, living off his sacrifice for 7 years. I pulled into the industrial park, scanning for threats. The area was deserted except for a few security lights casting long shadows between empty warehouses. This was Derek's killing ground, chosen because no one would hear gunshots or screams. Warehouse 47. You have 5 minutes, Derek said and hung up. But Derek didn't know I'd spent those 5 minutes calling in reinforcements. Rodriguez and his team were positioned around the perimeter, and FBI agents were closing in from 3 directions. Derek thought he was hunting one desperate husband. Instead, he'd walked into a military operation. Warehouse 47 was a concrete building with loading docks on both sides and minimal lighting. Perfect for an ambush, which is exactly what Derek intended. But I learned something during 13 deployments. Sometimes you have to walk into the trap to spring it. I approached the main entrance with my hands visible, but my weapon ready. The door was unlocked, creaking open to reveal a vast, empty space filled with shadows and the smell of rust and oil. Derek, I called out. Let's finish this. His voice came from somewhere above me, Probably a catwalk or office overlooking the warehouse floor. Throw the camera down and step back. First, you're going to tell me why you murdered a 9-year-old boy. Tommy was asking too many questions about his daddy's death. Kids see things adults miss. Derek's voice moved, confirming he was on the upper level. The little brat remembered seeing his father push his mother down the basement stairs 2 years before the pool party. My blood went cold. Derek had killed Jessica's father too. That's right, soldier boy. Margaret's husband didn't die of a heart attack. I helped him along, made it look natural. Margaret was starting to remember things differently, asking questions about why James fell down those stairs right after they'd been arguing about money. So you murdered the whole family. I married into the family to keep them quiet. But Jessica started getting suspicious after we divorced, and Margaret began investigating Tommy's death. They forced my hand. Derek stepped into view on the catwalk above, flanked by 2 armed men. Vincent Torino's people, just as Rodriguez had warned. All 3 had weapons pointed at me. Camera. Now. I pulled out the digital camera slowly, holding it up so Derek could see it. This contains video evidence of you murdering a child. Why would I give you the only proof I have? Because if you don't, Mrs. Chun dies tonight. Then Jessica dies tomorrow. Then everyone else who's helped you. But Derek had made a critical error. He'd just confessed to multiple murders while FBI agents were recording everything through the wire I was wearing. You want the camera? I said. Come down here and take it. Derek's face twisted with rage. He gestured to his companions, and they began moving toward the stairs leading to the warehouse floor. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. I dove behind a steel support beam just as gunfire erupted from above. Bullets sparked off concrete and metal, filling the warehouse with echoes and flying debris. But I wasn't alone anymore. Rodriguez's voice came through my earpiece. Federal agents, drop your weapons. Spotlights blazed to life outside the warehouse as FBI tactical teams surrounded the building. Derek's 2 companions immediately threw down their guns and raised their hands, recognizing a hopeless situation when they saw it. But Derek wasn't giving up. He kept firing from the catwalk, screaming about how he'd rather die than go to prison. Derek Walsh, Agent Morrison's voice boomed through a megaphone. You're surrounded. Surrender now and no one else gets hurt. My name is Marcus Webb. Derek screamed back. I'm a decorated veteran. I have rights. That's when something inside me snapped. Derek wasn't just a murderer. He was desecrating everything Marcus had died for, everything our service had meant. I moved through the warehouse with the tactical precision Derek didn't know I possessed. While he was focused on the FBI agents outside, I climbed a maintenance ladder to the upper level, approaching his position from behind. Derek was crouched behind an air conditioning unit, reloading his weapon when I reached him. Marcus Webb was my brother, I said quietly. Derek spun around, eyes wide with surprise and fear. For the first time since this nightmare began, he looked like what he really was, a coward who preyed on children and elderly women. He died saving 3 Afghan civilians from an IED blast. I continued. He left behind a wife and 2 daughters who still visit his grave every Sunday. And you've been stealing from them for 7 years. Derek raised his gun, but I was faster. My military training kicked in, and within seconds Derek was disarmed and zip-tied on the catwalk floor. You're under arrest for the murders of Thomas Walsh, Margaret Walsh, and James Walsh, Agent Morrison announced as FBI agents swarmed the warehouse. You have the right to remain silent. As they led Derek away in handcuffs, he looked back at me with pure hatred. This isn't over. I have friends who'll finish what I started. No, I said. It's over. And Marcus Webb's memory is finally free of you. 3 months after Derek's arrest, I sat in the front row of Riverside County Superior Court, watching the man who destroyed Jessica's family finally face justice. District Attorney Sarah Williams had built her case around the video evidence from Margaret's camera, the financial records showing Derek's theft of Marcus Webb's identity, and testimony from witnesses like Mrs. Chun. Derek looked different in his orange jumpsuit. The confident predator who'd threatened innocent people was gone, replaced by a desperate man who knew his crimes were finally catching up to him. The state of California versus Derek Allen Walsh, Judge Harrison announced. The defendant is charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder, identity theft, fraud, and conspiracy with organized crime figures. Jessica sat beside me, her hand trembling in mine. She'd been dreading this moment for months, having to relive Tommy's death and her mother's murder in front of strangers. But she was determined to see Derek pay for what he'd done to her family. Derek's lawyer, a sharp-dressed attorney named Robert Chun who specialized in defending organized crime figures, stood to address the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, my client Derek Walsh is not the monster the prosecution wants you to believe. Yes, he made mistakes. Yes, he struggled with gambling addiction and poor judgment. But the evidence against him is circumstantial at best, built on the testimony of grieving family members desperate to blame someone for tragic accidents. Chun was good. He painted Derek as a victim of circumstances, a man caught up in forces beyond his control. But he hadn't seen the video evidence yet. District Attorney Williams rose for her opening statement. She was a veteran prosecutor with steel gray hair and eyes that had seen too many victims of violent crime. Members of the jury, over the next week you're going to see and hear evidence that will disturb you. Evidence of a man who murdered a 9-year-old child to cover up his first killing. Evidence of systematic identity theft targeting a fallen war hero. Evidence of a predator who spent 8 years planning and executing the destruction of an entire family. Williams clicked a remote, and Tommy's smiling face appeared on screens throughout the courtroom. Jessica gripped my hand tighter. Thomas Walsh was 9 years old when Derek Walsh beat him to death with a pool skimmer and staged it as a diving accident. For 8 years, Derek thought he'd gotten away with the perfect crime. But Margaret Walsh, Tommy's mother, never stopped believing something was wrong. The first witness was Mrs. Chun. The elderly woman walked slowly to the witness stand, her voice barely above a whisper as she described seeing Derek's car outside Margaret's house the night she died. He had keys, she testified. He didn't break in. He walked right through the front door like he owned the place. Derek's lawyer tried to shake her testimony during cross-examination, suggesting her eyesight wasn't reliable and that she might be confused about the timeline. But Mrs. Chun held firm. I may be old, but I know what I saw. That man killed Margaret. The second day brought technical witnesses, forensic experts who'd analyzed the crime scene, the medical examiner who'd re-examined Tommy's autopsy, financial investigators who'd traced Derek's theft of Marcus Webb's identity. Dr. Patricia Rodriguez, the forensic pathologist, delivered the most damaging testimony. The trauma patterns on Thomas Walsh's skull are inconsistent with impact against a diving board. The angle and force suggest multiple strikes from a long cylindrical object, consistent with the pool maintenance equipment found at the scene. Derek's lawyer fought hard against the forensic evidence, bringing in his own experts who suggested alternative explanations. But the evidence was overwhelming. On the third day, Williams played the video from Margaret's camera. The courtroom fell silent as Tommy's murder played out on the screens. Several jurors looked away as Derek systematically beat the child and held him underwater. Jessica left the courtroom in tears, unable to watch her brother's final moments. Derek's face went white as his own voice came through the speakers. Want to play a game? See if you can swim to the bottom and bring this back up. When the video ended, the courtroom remained silent for nearly a minute. Judge Harrison had to call for order as murmurs filled the room. Derek's lawyer requested a recess, and I could see him frantically whispering to his client. The video evidence was damning beyond any reasonable doubt. The fourth day brought character witnesses for both sides. Margaret's neighbors testified about her kindness, her dedication to finding the truth about Tommy's death. Marcus Webb's widow took the stand to describe the financial devastation Derek's identity theft had caused their family. He stole more than my husband's name. Lisa Webb testified through tears. He stole the benefits meant for my daughter's education, the disability payments that were supposed to help us after Marcus died serving his country. Derek's lawyer called witnesses who testified about his military service record before his dishonorable discharge and his struggles with gambling addiction. But their testimony felt hollow against the mountain of evidence showing systematic murder and fraud. On the fifth day, Derek shocked everyone by taking the stand in his own defense. "I never meant for any of this to happen," he said, his voice breaking. "Tommy's death was an accident. I was trying to help him practice diving, and something went wrong." But under cross-examination, Williams tore his story apart piece by piece. "Mr. Walsh, if Tommy's death was accidental, why did you steal Marcus Webb's identity 6 years later?" "I needed a fresh start." "You needed to escape debts to organized crime figures, didn't you?" "I don't know what you're talking about." Williams clicked her remote, and phone records appeared on the screens. "These records show 17 calls between you and Vincent Torino, a known associate of the Castellano crime family, in the month before Margaret Walsh's death." Derek's composure finally cracked. "You don't understand the pressure I was under. Those people don't accept excuses. So you murdered an elderly woman to satisfy gambling debts?" "I never meant." Margaret wasn't supposed to be there that night. The courtroom erupted as Derek accidentally confessed to premeditated murder. Derek's accidental confession sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Judge Harrison slammed his gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order as reporters frantically took notes and gallery members whispered in disbelief. "Strike that last statement from the record," Derek's lawyer shouted, but the damage was done. The jury had heard Derek admit to premeditated murder. District Attorney Williams moved in for the kill. "Mr. Walsh, you just stated that Margaret wasn't supposed to be there that night. If her death was unrelated to burglary or robbery, what exactly were you doing in her house?" Derek's composure completely shattered. His hands shook as he gripped the witness stand, sweat beading on his forehead. "I want to take a break. I need to speak with my attorney." "Answer the question, Mr. Walsh," Judge Harrison ordered. Derek looked around the courtroom desperately, his eyes landing on Jessica. For a moment, something like remorse flickered across his face. Then it hardened into bitter resignation. "Fine. You want the whole truth?" Margaret Walsh was a nosy old woman who couldn't leave well enough alone. She spent months digging into Tommy's death, asking questions, hiring investigators. She was going to destroy everything I'd built. Williams leaned forward. "What did Margaret discover about Tommy's death?" "She found medical records. Hospital reports from the day Tommy died that showed his injuries weren't consistent with a diving board accident. The old lady was smarter than I gave her credit for." My blood ran cold. Derek was about to confess to murdering Tommy, but not for the reasons we'd expected. "Why did you kill Thomas Walsh?" Williams asked quietly. Derek's laugh was hollow, defeated. "Because the little brat remembered something he shouldn't have. Something that could have sent me to prison for life even before I married his sister." Jessica gripped my arm, her face pale with shock. We thought we knew Derek's motive, but there was something deeper, something more sinister than we'd imagined. "What did Tommy remember?" "He saw me kill his father." The courtroom erupted in gasps and shouts. Judge Harrison slammed his gavel, threatening to clear the gallery, but Derek kept talking as if a dam had burst inside him. "James Walsh caught me stealing from his construction company. $60,000 I'd skimmed over 6 months to pay gambling debts. He said he was going to the police, going to have me arrested. So I followed him home that night." Jessica was crying now, her whole body shaking. I put my arm around her, holding her close as Derek destroyed what was left of her family's memory. I made it look like he had a heart attack. Waited until Margaret went to the store, then confronted James in the basement. He tried to fight me, but I was younger, stronger. I held him down until his heart gave out from the stress. Williams stepped closer to the witness stand. "And Tommy saw this. The kid came home early from baseball practice. I didn't know he was there until I heard footsteps upstairs. By the time I got up from the basement, Tommy was hiding in the kitchen pantry. I thought maybe he hadn't seen anything, that maybe I could convince him it was an accident. But Tommy knew better. Kids see everything, remember everything. Over the next 2 years, Tommy started asking questions. Why was Daddy in the basement when Mommy found him? Why did Daddy look scared before he died? The boy was putting pieces together. Derek wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, but continued his confession. I started dating Jessica to keep close to the family, to monitor what Tommy might say. But the boy was getting older, more suspicious. He started telling people he thought someone hurt his daddy. I knew it was only a matter of time before he remembered seeing me that night. So you murdered him at the family barbecue. I didn't plan it that way. I was supposed to be watching the kids in the pool, keeping them safe. But Tommy pulled me aside and said he'd been having dreams about the night his daddy died. Dreams where he saw a man in the basement, a man who looked like me. The courtroom was dead silent now, everyone transfixed by Derek's confession. I panicked. I told Tommy we should play a diving game, see how deep he could swim. When he went down to get the toy I'd thrown in, I used the pool skimmer to make sure he couldn't come back up. Jessica buried her face in my shoulder, sobbing. The monster who destroyed her family was finally revealing the full scope of his crimes. And Margaret? Williams pressed. Margaret never believed Tommy's death was accidental. She hired private investigators, gathered evidence, even found that damn camera footage from the barbecue. 3 weeks ago, she called me and said she knew what really happened to James and Tommy. She said she was going to the police unless I turned myself in. Derek looked directly at Jessica, his voice breaking. I couldn't let her destroy the life I'd built. I had a business, respect, money from Marcus Webb's benefits. So I went to her house to convince her to keep quiet. But she wouldn't listen. She said Tommy and James deserved justice. So you pushed her down the basement stairs. She fought harder than I expected for an old woman. Clawed at the doorframe, tried to run. But I was stronger. Derek's voice dropped to a whisper. I never wanted to be a killer. But once you cross that line, once you take one life to protect yourself, it gets easier each time. The confession was complete. Derek had murdered 3 generations of Jessica's family to cover up his theft and protect his criminal empire built on a dead soldier's identity. Williams returned to her table, her case ironclad beyond any reasonable doubt. Derek's lawyer tried damage control during redirect, arguing his client was mentally unstable, that the confession was coerced. But Derek's detailed knowledge of all 3 murders made it impossible to claim innocence or insanity. Judge Harrison called for a recess, and Derek was led away in handcuffs. As he passed our row, he looked at Jessica one final time. I did love you, he said quietly. That wasn't part of the plan. Jessica didn't look up. She was done giving Derek even a moment of her attention. After Derek's courtroom breakdown, his lawyer requested an immediate recess to consult with his client. But the damage was catastrophic. Derek had confessed to 3 premeditated murders in front of 12 jurors, court reporters, and television cameras broadcasting live to the entire region. When court resumed an hour later, Derek looked like a broken man. His lawyer, Robert Chun, stood to address Judge Harrison with defeat written across his weathered face. Your Honor, given the testimony provided by my client today, we would like to change our plea to guilty on all charges. Jessica's hand squeezed mine so tightly I lost feeling in my fingers. After 8 years of living with questions and grief, we were finally witnessing Derek accept responsibility for destroying her family. Judge Harrison leaned forward, his voice carrying the weight of 3 decades on the bench. Mr. Walsh, do you understand that by changing your plea to guilty on 3 counts of first-degree murder, you are waiving your right to appeal and accepting a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole? Derek stood on shaking legs. I understand, Your Honor, and you make this plea freely and voluntarily, without coercion or promises of leniency. Yes, sir. District Attorney Williams rose to address the court. Your Honor, While the state accepts the defendant's guilty plea, we request that Mr. Walsh be sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms rather than concurrent sentences. The systematic nature of these murders, spanning 8 years and targeting 3 generations of the same family, represents a level of premeditated evil that demands the harshest punishment available under California law. Judge Harrison nodded solemnly. Before I impose sentence, does anyone wish to address the court? Jessica stood slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. I would like to speak, Your Honor. She walked to the podium with dignity that Derek had tried but failed to destroy. When she spoke, her words carried the strength of someone who had endured unimaginable loss but refused to be broken by it. Derek Walsh stole my childhood when he murdered my father. He stole my innocence when he murdered my baby brother. He stole my mother's final years when he murdered her to cover up his crimes. But he didn't steal my will to seek justice, and he didn't steal my ability to heal. Derek kept his eyes fixed on the table, unable to face the woman whose family he had systematically destroyed. For 8 years, I lived with guilt, wondering if I could have prevented Tommy's death. I blamed myself for bringing Derek into our family, for not seeing the monster hiding behind his smile. But today, I finally understand that evil is not my responsibility to prevent. It's my responsibility to stop. Jessica turned to look directly at Derek for the first time since his arrest. You will spend the rest of your life in prison, but you will not spend it in peace. Every day, you will remember the innocent people you murdered. Every night, you will dream of their faces. You stole their lives, but you destroyed your own soul in the process. She returned to her seat, and Judge Harrison called for other victim impact statements. Mrs. Shin took the podium next, her elderly voice steady despite her fear. Margaret Walsh was my dearest friend for 15 years. She was a woman of faith, kindness, and courage. Derek Walsh tried to silence her voice by murdering her, but today, justice speaks for Margaret and all his victims. Marcus Webb's widow, Lisa, addressed the court via video link from Colorado, her voice thick with emotion. Derek Walsh didn't just steal my husband's identity. He desecrated the memory of a man who died serving his country. Marcus gave his life protecting Afghan civilians, and Derek used that sacrifice to enrich himself through crime. No sentence can undo that dishonor, but perhaps it can prevent others from suffering the same betrayal. Captain Rodriguez testified about the broader impact of Derek's identity theft on military families, presenting evidence of 17 other cases where Derek had fraudulently accessed veterans' benefits using falsified documents. Finally, Judge Harrison called Derek to stand for sentencing. Derek Allen Walsh, you have pleaded guilty to 3 counts of first-degree murder, multiple counts of identity theft, fraud, and conspiracy with organized crime figures. In my 32 years on this bench, I have never encountered a defendant who demonstrated such calculated evil over such an extended period. Derek swayed slightly, but remained standing. You murdered James Walsh to cover up your theft from his construction company. You murdered 9-year-old Thomas Walsh because he witnessed your first crime. You murdered Margaret Walsh because she refused to let you escape justice. Each murder was planned, deliberate, and designed to protect your criminal enterprise. Judge Harrison's voice grew harder with each sentence. Furthermore, your theft of Marcus Webb's identity represents a profound betrayal of every man and woman who has served this nation with honor. You used a fallen hero's sacrifice to fund your gambling addiction and criminal activities. The courtroom was completely silent as Judge Harrison prepared to announce Derek's fate. The court sentences you to 3 consecutive terms of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. You will spend the remainder of your natural life in the California Department of Corrections, with no hope of freedom, no chance of redemption, and no opportunity to harm another innocent person. Derek collapsed into his chair as the reality of his sentence hit him. 3 life terms meant he would die in prison, never again walking free, never again threatening innocent families. Additionally, Judge Harrison continued, the court orders full restitution to the Webb family for all fraudulently obtained benefits, totaling $437,000, plus interest. As bailiffs prepared to escort Derek back to his cell, he looked one final time at Jessica and me. The arrogance and manipulation were gone, replaced by the hollow stare of a man who had finally faced consequences for his actions. Justice has been served, Judge Harrison declared, bringing his gavel down with finality. 6 months after Derek's conviction, I stood in the cemetery where 3 generations of Jessica's family now rested together. The morning sun cast long shadows across the granite headstones, each bearing names that had become sacred to us: James Walsh, Thomas Walsh, Margaret Walsh. Jessica knelt beside Tommy's grave, placing fresh flowers beside the small memorial stone. She did this every Sunday, a ritual that had evolved from grief into celebration of their memory. I used to come here and feel angry, she said quietly. Angry at Derek, angry at God, angry at myself for not protecting them. But now, when I look at their names, I feel proud. I knelt beside her, my hand finding hers among the flowers. Proud that they never gave up seeking truth. Dad fought against Derek's theft until his last breath. Tommy's innocence exposed Derek's evil. Mom spent years gathering evidence to bring justice. Her voice was steady now, strengthened by the trials we'd endured. They didn't die in vain, Ethan. Their deaths brought Derek's crimes to light. The past 6 months had been a journey of healing neither of us expected. The trial had given us closure, but what came after surprised us both. Instead of retreating from the world, Jessica chose to honor her family by helping others find justice for their own cold cases. The foundation paperwork is finalized, I told her, pulling out the official documents. The Margaret Walsh Foundation for Cold Case Justice is officially recognized by the state of California. Jessica's eyes filled with tears as she read her mother's name on the letterhead. We'd raised over $200,000 in 6 months. Money donated by people who'd followed Derek's trial and wanted to support families seeking justice for unsolved murders. Mrs. Chun called this morning, Jessica said. 3 families have already contacted the foundation asking for help reopening investigations that police abandoned. Mrs. Chun had become our first volunteer, using her experience as Derek's witness to counsel other elderly people afraid to testify in criminal cases. The woman who'd been terrified to speak up had found her voice and was helping others find theirs. My phone buzzed with a message from Captain Rodriguez. Derek's conviction had led to a broader investigation that uncovered 17 other cases of military identity theft. 5 more criminals were now facing federal charges for stealing benefits meant for veterans' families. Marcus's family got their money back, I told Jessica. All $437,000 Derek stole, plus interest. Lisa Webb says they're starting a scholarship fund in Marcus's name. Jessica smiled through her tears. Your friend would be proud that his sacrifice is helping other military families. We walked to the new memorial bench we'd installed near Tommy's grave. The brass plaque read, "In memory of all victims of violent crime, and in honor of those who never stopped seeking justice." I keep thinking about what Derek said in court, Jessica mused. About crossing a line, about how killing gets easier each time. I understand now why some people choose revenge over justice. But you chose differently. We chose differently. She squeezed my hand. Your military training taught you discipline, patience, building a case instead of taking immediate action. If I'd been alone, I might have done something we'd both regret. I thought about the night in the warehouse when I'd had Derek at my mercy. The rage I'd felt, the desire to make him pay with violence for what he'd done to innocents. But justice served through the legal system had proven more satisfying than any personal revenge could have been. Detective Morrison called yesterday, I said. The Riverside PD is creating a new cold case unit. And they want our foundation to consult on cases where families feel investigations were inadequate. Jessica's transformation over these 6 months amazed me. The grieving woman who'd collapsed in our kitchen had become an advocate, a voice for families who'd lost hope in the system. Tommy would be 17 now, she said, looking at his headstone. Old enough to understand why we fought so hard for truth. I think he'd be proud that his death helped save other families from what we went through. As we prepared to leave the cemetery, Jessica turned back for one last look at her family's graves. Derek took 8 years of my life with his lies and violence. But he couldn't take my ability to love, to heal, to help others. That's how we really win against evil. We become stronger, more compassionate, more determined to protect the innocent. Walking back to our car, Jessica's phone rang. Our first official case consultation. A family in San Diego whose daughter's death had been ruled suicide despite evidence suggesting murder. The Margaret Walsh Foundation. Jessica answered professionally. How can we help you find justice? As she spoke with the grieving parents, I realized we'd found our purpose beyond the pain Derek had caused. Every family we helped, every cold case we reopened, every criminal we helped convict was a victory for James, Tommy, and Margaret Walsh. Derek Walsh sits in a maximum security prison cell tonight, serving 3 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole. He will never hurt another innocent person. He will never steal another fallen soldier's identity. He will die behind bars, forgotten by everyone except his victims' families. And we remember him only as a reminder of why justice matters. Justice isn't always swift, but it's always worth pursuing. Evil may win battles, but truth wins wars. Stories like this remind us why we never give up fighting for the innocent.